Hi everyone, welcome. I am Paulie Velton. Welcome back to another episode of my channel. This one replacing the CV axle on a 2004 Subaru Impreza RS with a 2.5 liter engine. CV axle replacements become necessary in cases where the CV joint, one of the joints, has failed most often. And joint failures typically take place on the outboard joint, where the boot has torn open over time of use and the grease comes out of that. It's spun out and the joint dries, and then it begins to damage itself as you're driving it. And then you have this telltale popping sound when the car is rolling and you're going through a turn. Typically you'll hear that popping sound. Now, years ago what we used to do was we would either replace that joint, or if you caught it soon enough and the joint wasn't damaged, the boot was just torn and leaking, we'd replace the boots. But now it's gotten to the point where the axle assemblies are about the price of the boot kits. The axle assemblies for the Subaru Impreza for this particular car are about $50. So it doesn't really make sense to replace the boots or service the thing when you can spend 50 bucks and get the whole thing rebuilt and ready to go. Now there is a little trick to these joints that you have to know about, and I'll show you that a little bit later in the video. But the disassembly process and the removal process is similar to other cars. You've got an axle nut, which is held in place, secured more or less with a peen, where they knock the edge of the nut over into a slot that's in the end of the axle. So here I just took a chisel and a hammer and I opened that up. This makes it a little bit easier to get the nut off. And a 32 millimeter socket with what we call a breaker bar. You may need to use a cheater bar or something like that to get that loose. They can be pretty stiff. The other issues you can run into is where the axle doesn't really want to remove itself very easily from the spindle. If you're faced with that situation, now what I like to do typically is use something that's not going to mushroom or damage the end of the axle over as I'm hammering it out, because it's really what you're going to have to do is pound it out of there. Now you can use a large punch and a hammer. You can use a dead blow on the end of that until it's in so far that you don't have to, struggle so much to get it out of there. You can even use a block of wood. You can use a hammer directly on the face of it. You just don't want to hammer very much to where it would mushroom the end over and make it difficult to extract from the car, especially if for some reason you're going to reuse this axle. You do need to make sure you'll be able to get the nut on there. So I don't hardly ever pound on the end of the axle with a hammer directly. I always want to put some kind of cushion in there so I don't damage the end of that axle. So you can spray it down with some rust buster or some kind of penetrating lubricant before you start working on it if you notice that it doesn't want to budge, it doesn't want to move in at all. So what am I talking about? Well, here I'm showing an example. I'm removing the pinch bolt from the steering knuckle to drop the control arm down so I can get the axle out. It's necessary to do this to get the amount of travel you need to get the axle out of there. Now you don't have to remove the pinch bolt. You could go ahead and remove the nut from the joint and separate the control arm from the ball joint if you want to do that too. But it follows that if you're replacing the axle, you most likely have to replace the joint too. They've both been in there a long time. And check out my video on how to remove a stubborn ball joint from a Subaru Impreza to give you some tips to keep you out of trouble on that. You do want to be careful with those pinch bolts. You break them off and you've got problems, okay? So here I'm just going to pry down on the control arm and pop that joint out of there. And again, this is a new joint, so it's very easy to remove. And there you can see the axle. I just pushed it in a little bit. Now that I've got enough room to swing the spindle out of the way, I've got that pulled out. Now this is an image from above. I'm leaning over the passenger side fender with the hood up, and I've got a very large pry bar. I'm just going to wiggle that, kind of jerk it back and forth, and at just the right angle and the stress, it'll pop free. There's a snap ring that retains the inboard joint. So we're looking at the inboard joint that goes into the differential underneath the hood. Once you get that pop free like that, I'm just going to reach in, grab that joint, and just kind of help it out of the car. Okay, so for your next amazing feat, you're going to reuse the little stub shaft in order to replace this. When you get your new axle, that's not going to come with this piece. And so you're going to pull this out of the old axle, and it's just a simple roll pin that holds that in place. The new axle that I got from AutoZone had a replacement roll pin and an axle nut. So had everything I needed. So there's the roll pin right there. So you're just going to slide this in so it's at the right angle. There we go. So we can drive our roll pin in there. Now I'm going to put this up on something so that when I'm pounding on it, I don't damage the boot. So I'll get a piece of wood. Hang it off the boot. Hang the boot over the edge there. And just drive her home. And that's it. Now I'm going to go ahead and put some lubrication here where the seal's going to ride. But I've got all this cleaned off so when I put it through the seal, it doesn't get the seal all dirty. Once you've got the stub in place, you can go ahead and reinsert in the car. Remember, you've lubricated the end there for the seal. And the trick here to getting this back in is you do have to kind of slam it home. You can see that I'm doing that there. You want to straighten the axle as much as possible to get the best angle there. You can see where I straightened it, and then it slammed in. So from up above, you can see there's no shiny part left on the inboard joint. So that's in all the way. And then you simply install it into the spindle and insert the ball joint back in and put your pinch bolt in, torque your nuts back down to spec, and you're good to go. It's really just that simple. It's not a very complicated procedure. I think just about anybody with some good hand tools and some patience can do it. So I hope this video has been helpful to you. It doesn't matter whether you're working on the left side or the right side. They're really the same, except the driver's side, you have to pop it free. You have to be underneath the car. You can't get to it from up above. The engine's in the way. So again, I hope that's helpful to you. If you have any questions, you can feel free to leave those on my channel for you. I'll help you as much as I can. Otherwise, good luck.